Michael Ware is our Sky News US contributor. Michael, good to see you. A short time ago, the IDF tweeted that IDF air and ground troops are currently attacking in the Gaza Strip. It's not clear whether that actually means that a ground incursion is in place. Having covered the last couple of conflicts in Gaza myself, it tends not to matter because the Air Force does a pretty big job in terms of wiping out a lot of those Hamas militants, plus a lot of civilians too, a lot of civilians. But what do you make of what's going on?
Yeah, well, obviously, it's a very messy and sad and perilous situation that's currently going on in Israel and in Gaza. You're right. The Israeli Defence Forces, not even quite an hour ago, maybe just over an hour ago, put out that tweet that said air, but most importantly, ground forces were now attacking in Gaza. But you're right to question what's the nature of those ground force operations. It certainly wouldn't appear at this early stage. And look, right now we don't know. It's all shrouded in darkness and in secret. But I don't think anyone's expecting a wholesale assault by the Israelis on the Gaza Strip. I mean, the last time we saw major ground action was way back in July 2014 when the Israeli troops went in there to destroy tunnels through which the Hamas terrorist organisation was bringing in men and weapons. This time, we have to hope that it doesn't escalate to that. We already know that the Israelis have around 3 brigades massed along the Gaza frontier, 2 infantry brigades and an armoured brigade. We know, as you said, that a lot of the work is done by precision strikes. And already in this conflict, the Israelis have hit over 600 plus targets. At the same time, Hamas has fired almost 2,000 rockets into Israel, targeting the civilian population. Fortunately, Israel's famous Iron Dome anti-missile interception system has prevented 85 to 90% of those rockets hitting any targets inside Israel. Nonetheless, 7 Israelis have already died, including a soldier, and according to the Palestinians, at least 103 Palestinians have died, including 27 children. Now, that said, the Israelis are trying to be very targeted about this. There was a story that I heard about one Gaza resident who received a phone call at home in his apartment from the Israeli military saying, "Get out of your building, we're about to attack the building next door," and everyone evacuated. So the Israelis are doing what they can, and Hamas is firing relentlessly at the Israeli population. But you know, there's the flashpoints of East Jerusalem. I mean, this started in some ways last week when Israelis have been moving to evict half a dozen Palestinian families who live in East Jerusalem, and they've been there for decades. So that's what really ratcheted up the tensions. And then we saw the Israeli police go into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the 3rd holiest site in Islam, with flashbang grenades and tear gas. And then within a day or two of that, Hamas started its onslaught. So there's also a lot of politics at play here. Don't forget, the Israelis just had an election. Leader Benjamin Netanyahu is facing corruption charges, and because the election had no clear result, he hasn't been able to form a government. So now the opposition is trying to do that. At the same time, the Palestinians themselves were supposed to have an election, but that's been postponed. So you have hardline factions on both sides, Israeli and Palestinian, who are playing off against each other. And they're the ones who are really benefiting here, not the people in the middle. It's the right-wing hardliners in Israel, and it's the terrorist factions among the Palestinians.
And then you've got Egypt, that is usually the ones who have to try and broker some kind of ceasefire or some kind of peace deal. But you know, Egypt doesn't exactly have an open border with Gaza either, because they're very wary of Hamas militants. And you know, I've seen in the past that they actually hide in hospitals. So, you know, in the hope that the hospitals aren't going to get bombed, that Al-Shifa hospital is never going to get bombed. So they actually hide in there. And that's an example of what the militants do.
Well, that's right. I mean, you know, there's both sides to this conflict, and there's long ancient histories, as we all know. But yes, Hamas does use its own 2 million people in the Gaza Strip as human shields. They also fire indiscriminate rockets at civilian populations. Both of those are war crimes. However, on the other hand, people would argue that the Israelis keep the Palestinians in a state of occupation, and the Israelis are intent on making sure that, at least politically, the Palestinians remain divided. Because you have the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and Hamas is the main political organisation in the Gaza Strip, and the Israelis do not want those two groups to find common ground. So Egypt, historically and now, has an oversized diplomatic role to play. They are the ones who are best positioned to play honest broker here, and let's hope that they're able to achieve something. But one other thing is, you know, in the hopes that Israel is not launching a massive offensive deep into Gaza itself, there is a view that perhaps what the Israeli Defence Force is trying to do is to re-establish deterrence by letting Hamas know that the Israelis are not going to put up with this kind of violence, and in that way perhaps lead to a ceasefire.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Michael Ware, always good to chat. We'll talk to you again soon.